I didn't ask for a wife. That's the part people forget when they tell this story. They remember the dead. They remember the ceremony. They remember the way she looked standing at my gate with one bag and a face that gave nothing away. But nobody remembers that I didn't ask. I had a house. I had work. I had a routine that fit me the way a good coat fits. Not glamorous, but solid and mine. I had built everything I owned with my own hands and my own decisions and the complete absence of anyone who might tell me I was doing it wrong. I liked it that way. I was 38 years old, and I had decided quietly and without drama that I was the kind of man who was better alone. And then Lord Hargrove sat down across my desk. He had been a significant man once, 300 acres in the South, a respected name, a seat at dinners that mattered. I had known him peripherally for years, the way you know men in your county without needing to know them closely. He was the sort who spoke loudly at public gatherings and believed that volume was the same as authority. Now he sat quietly, which told me everything. He smelled faintly of brandy. It was 10 in the morning. The debt was legitimate. He had borrowed against the estate 2 years prior when the harvest failed back to back and the tenants couldn't pay and the creditors could. He had come to me because I was the kind of man who lent money without requiring you to explain yourself in a room full of other people. I had extended the terms once already the previous autumn when he came to me with a plan I privately considered optimistic but chose not to say so. £4,000. With interest, closer to 5. I let him sit there for a while after he finished talking, not to be cruel. I had found over the years that silence made other men fill the space, and what they filled it with was usually more honest than what they had planned to say. He lasted about 40 seconds. "I have a daughter," he said. I looked at him. He looked at the hat in his hands. "Eleanor. She's 23. She manages the house. She's been managing it since her mother passed 3 years ago now. Educated, sharp. She keeps the accounts herself because He stopped, cleared his throat. "She is a good woman, Mr. Calloway. She is the best thing I have produced in my life, and I know that, and I am not unaware of what I am asking." I studied him. "You're asking me to take your daughter in exchange for a debt," I said. "I'm asking you to marry her," he said. "There's a difference, is there?" He met my eyes then. For just a moment, something real passed across his face, not the brandy warmth and not the rehearsed speech, just a father who had run out of road. "She deserves better than this," he said quietly. "I know that. But she will not starve, and she will not be left to the mercy of whatever creditor comes after me when I'm gone. You're a man of your word. You are fair. I have watched you for 20 years, and you have never once been deliberately unkind." He paused. "That is not a small thing." I looked at the window. The grounds outside were gray with early March. The trees along the north fence were still bare. There was a light rain beginning. "I'll meet her first," I said. She came on Thursday. I had half expected Hargrove to coach her, to send a version of his daughter that had been prepared and polished for the occasion, dressed for approval, armed with the right answers. Instead, she walked in and sat down without waiting to be invited and looked at me the way a surveyor looks at land before deciding what it's worth. She was not what I expected. Not because of her appearance, though I noticed that the way you notice a room has changed when you walk into it. Something different in the light. Something you can't immediately name. It was the quality of her attention. The way she assessed the room, and then me, and then the table between us, with the same level, unhurried consideration, like each thing was worth exactly the time she gave it and no more. She folded her hands on the table. "My father told me the terms," she said. "Did he?" "He told me you would forgive the debt in exchange for marriage, that I would live here, that the arrangement would be formal and financial, that you were not the sort of man to cause trouble." "That's mostly accurate," I said. "Then I have a condition." I kept my face neutral. "Go on." I will not be a decoration, she said. I will not sit in a drawing room waiting for permission to exist. I managed my father's household for 3 years. I found the errors in his accounts and corrected them. I negotiated with the grain supplier when he was too proud to admit the terms had changed. I organized the tenant records when they hadn't been touched in a decade. She paused. If I am to live here, I will be useful. I will manage something real. Household accounts, correspondence, estate records, I don't particularly care which, but I will not spend my days being quietly invisible. The fire made a small sound. Rain moved against the window. All right, I said. She blinked. Just once. All right, she repeated. I have no interest in a decoration either, I said. The household accounts are a disaster. My previous steward had a creative interpretation of what the word honest means. You can start there. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, closer to a recalibration, like she had arrived braced for a wall and found a door instead and was deciding whether to trust it. When? She asked. The marriage or the accounts? Both. Saturday for the marriage, I said. The accounts the Monday after. She looked at me a moment longer, then she nodded once and stood. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, she said. James, I said. A small pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not much. Enough. James, she said. She left. I sat at my desk for a few minutes after she was gone, looking at the rain on the window. I was not thinking about anything in particular, or I was telling myself that. Then I rang for my solicitor. We were married on Saturday morning, a quiet ceremony in the small chapel on the edge of the grounds. No guests except the solicitor, Agnes Peel, my housekeeper in Hargrove, who wept in the way of men who know they are responsible for something and are choosing to frame it as sentiment. Eleanor did not cry. She stood very straight and spoke her vows with the clarity of a woman who had decided that if she was going to do a thing, she was going to do it properly. When the priest said the final words, she turned to me, and I noticed, standing that close to her for the first time, that her eyes were very dark and very steady, and that she was perhaps the most composed person I had ever stood beside. She signed the register without hesitation, put the pen down, looked up at me, looked up. Our eyes held for a moment. Something I didn't have a name for moved through my chest. Thank you, James, she said. You don't need to thank me. I know, she said. I'm thanking you anyway. Then she turned to Agnes, whom she had met 20 minutes earlier, and asked where the household ledgers were kept. Agnes led her away. I walked out into the March air. The rain had stopped. The grounds were wet and gray and very still. I stood there for a while. The first 2 weeks were a careful performance of normalcy on both our parts. She came to breakfast at 7. Always 7, not 1 minute before or after. She said good morning. She asked about the weather with the tone of a woman who understood that small rituals were the scaffolding on which two strangers built the ability to share space without it becoming unbearable. I answered. I asked about her work. She answered. We were very civil. We were also watchful of each other, not with suspicion, more the way you watch something unfamiliar. Attentive, careful, not yet sure what to expect. I noticed things I hadn't intended to notice, the way she moved through a room. Efficient, purposeful, but without urgency. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on something, the same gesture repeated, always the same strand. The way she paused in doorways sometimes, just for a second, as if she was deciding whether the room deserved her full attention before she gave it. I noticed all of this the way you notice weather, without deciding to. On the Wednesday of the second week, she came to dinner with a ledger under her arm and set it beside her plate with the quiet authority of someone who has decided that dinner conversation can include facts. Your grain deliveries, she said. I looked up. The records show 36 deliveries billed in the last 18 months, she said. The actual delivery receipts in the storage room confirm 29. I put down my fork. 7 false billings, I said. 7. The discrepancy averages 12 shillings per entry. Cartwright, I said. Your steward. Yes. I sat back. Cartwright had been with me 4 years. I had trusted him without examining the basis of that trust, which was my own fault. What would you suggest? I asked. She had clearly already decided. I left the corrected ledger on his desk this morning with a note explaining that I found the discrepancy and that accounts going forward would be audited monthly. He'll resign, I said. Probably, she said. It seemed more dignified than a direct accusation. She picked up her wine glass. I watched her. Cartwright resigned the following morning. I told Agnes to ask Mrs. Eleanor whether she had recommendations for a replacement. Agnes came back 20 minutes later to say that Mrs. Eleanor had already written to 2 candidates and expected replies by Friday. I sat with that for a moment, then I went back to work. But I was thinking about her face when she said, probably, the small, precise satisfaction in it. The way she picked up her wine glass after, like the matter was simply concluded and we could move on. I thought about it longer than I should have. She never complained about the house. I expected her to eventually. 6 years of a large house with no proper management had taken a toll. The east parlor had boxes from my mother's effects I had never addressed. The upper hallway curtains were a relic of the previous century. The kitchen garden had gone somewhere between wild and abandoned. Eleanor moved through all of it without commentary. She didn't complain, and she didn't act without asking. Every time she wanted to change something, she came to me first and said, without drama, that she had noticed this or that and wondered what I preferred. Most of the time I said, do as you think best. So she did. The kitchen garden was the first thing. She found a boy from the village who knew plants and hired him 2 mornings a week. Within a month, there were things growing I couldn't identify. She told me their names at dinner. I forgot most of them. She told me again, patiently, without making me feel stupid for forgetting. One evening, she came to find me in the study. She stood in the doorway with the evening light behind her and said she had noticed the east parlor was closed and asked if there was a reason. I told her about my mother, about the boxes. She was quiet for a moment. Would you like to go through them? She asked. Or would you prefer I leave the room as it is? What are the options between those two? I asked. She thought about it. I could open the room and air it without touching anything. You could go through the boxes in your own time. Or I could go through them with you if that would be easier. I looked at the floor. Open the room, I said. I'll deal with the boxes. She nodded. She didn't push. I went in one Sunday morning and opened the first box. Inside were my mother's books, her reading glasses, a shawl she had worn every winter that still smelled, very faintly, of the lavender she kept in her wardrobe. I sat on the floor of the east parlor for a long time. Eleanor did not come in. She had no way of knowing I was there. But when I came out 2 hours later and passed her in the hallway, she looked at my face and said simply, "There's fresh tea in the study," and walked on. I drank the tea. I didn't thank her. She didn't seem to need me to. The thing about Eleanor was that she noticed. Not loudly, not in the way of people who want credit for noticing. She just saw things and responded to them as if her response was simply the natural next thing, not a kindness she was extending, but a correction she was making to something that had been incomplete. She noticed I worked late and started leaving a covered plate on the study desk on evenings I missed dinner. She noticed I took my coffee without sugar, but weaker on days I was working from home. She noticed the gardener's wife was ill and organized meals to be sent without mentioning it to me until after, just as a report. I started noticing things too. She hummed in the kitchen garden in the mornings. Not a full melody, 3 or 4 notes repeated, like something happening at the edge of consciousness. I heard it first from the path on an April morning and stopped walking. I stood there longer than made sense. Then I walked on and didn't mention it. She took her tea, very hot, and held the cup in both hands, even in warm weather, like she was cold somewhere deeper than weather could reach. She read quickly. The books she borrowed from my shelves came back faster than I expected, and when I asked about them, she had real opinions. The kind that come from actually thinking about something rather than wanting to say the right thing. She had been, I started to understand, very alone. Not dramatically alone, just quietly, steadily alone in the way of someone who has been responsible for everything around them for so long they stopped expecting anyone to be responsible for them. I found that I thought about this more than I intended to, and I found myself rearranging my evenings, coming home earlier, finding reasons to pass the study when the door was open and she was working inside, sitting longer at dinner than I needed to. I told myself it was just the novelty of company. I knew it wasn't. She got sick in the 3rd month, a cold that settled in her chest and refused to leave. She didn't mention it for 2 days. I noticed it on the 3rd morning when she came to breakfast, with a grayness under her eyes, and reached for the teapot with the careful deliberateness of someone conserving energy. I took the teapot from her hand before she could pour it. She looked up at me. We were standing close, closer than we usually stood. I could see the tiredness in her face, the slight flush of fever at her cheekbones, and underneath all of that something else. The particular vulnerability of someone who is ill and has no practice accepting help. Go to bed, I said. I'm perfectly fine. Eleanor. She closed her mouth. I had learned by then that my saying her name in a certain tone had an effect on her, not because it was commanding, but because she was so accustomed to pushing through things without anyone noticing that someone noticing stopped her in her tracks. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved in her expression. All right, she said quietly. She went upstairs. I canceled my morning appointments. I went to the kitchen and spoke to Agnes, who immediately began organizing things with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for a reason to fuss over someone in this house. Then I went to the pantry. Eleanor had mentioned 6 weeks earlier in passing, while we were talking about something else entirely, that her mother used to make her a specific tea when she was ill as a child. A blend. She had described it the way you describe something you haven't thought about in years. Half remembered, slightly surprised to find the memory there at all. I had not forgotten. I went through the pantry systematically until I found it. A tin at the back of the second shelf, clearly there for years. I said nothing to Agnes about what I was doing. I asked her to make the tea and bring it up with breakfast. She did. That evening, I passed Eleanor's room and heard her moving around, which meant she was improving. I went back to my study and sat down and looked at the fire and did not examine what I was feeling with any particular honesty. She recovered in 4 days. On the 5th morning, she came back to breakfast, looking like herself. She poured her own tea and looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen before. The tea helped, she said. Good. It was my mother's blend, she said carefully. I mentioned it once, weeks ago, in passing. Agnes found it in the pantry, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. We both knew that wasn't entirely accurate. Thank you, she said, quietly, with the weight of someone thanking you for something larger than the thing they were naming. I picked up the newspaper. I wasn't reading it. And across the table, she was looking at me with those dark, steady eyes, and something had shifted between us, and we were both pretending it hadn't, and the pretending was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The dinner with Whitmore was in the 4th month, and it was entirely my fault. Whitmore was a business associate of 15 years, brilliant with money and indifferent to people. He arrived on a Thursday evening, and I had not thought to mention Eleanor's role in the estate before he sat down. I assumed he would register her as a person and proceed accordingly. That was my mistake. Whitmore talked across her for 3 hours, not cruelly. He was too polished for cruelty. He was precisely, skillfully, invisibly dismissive in the way of men who have decided that women at dinner tables are atmosphere rather than participants. He addressed me. He addressed the wine. He addressed a point about railway investments to a spot approximately 18 inches above Eleanor's head. Eleanor was perfect. She answered when addressed. She asked the correct questions at the correct moments. She smiled at the correct angles. She was everything a formal dinner required, and she disappeared completely inside it. I watched this happen. I watched her become exactly the quietly invisible thing she had told me on the first day she refused to be, and I said nothing. Whitmore left at 10. I walked him out and closed the door and stood in the hall. Then I went to the drawing room. Eleanor was standing at the window with her back to me. The room was lit by the fire and 2 candles, and she was very still. "Eleanor," I said. She turned. Her face was composed. It was the composure of someone who has been composed for several hours and is tired of it. "I should have told him who you are before you sat down," I said. "I should have told him what you've done here. The steward, the accounts, the estate records. I should have given him that before dinner so he knew who he was talking to." She looked at me carefully. "You don't owe me that," she said. "No," I agreed. "You're owed it, regardless of whether I owe it. Those are 2 different things, and I confused them tonight, and I won't do it again." She was quiet. The fire moved. "My father used to do the same thing," she said after a moment. "I would spend a week preparing his dinners, the menu, the seating, the background on every guest so he would know what to talk about. And then I would sit at the table and not exist." She paused. "I got very good at not existing." "I know," I said, "and I let it happen tonight, and I am sorry." She looked at me, really looked at me. And for a moment in the firelight, with her composure slightly worn, I saw something beneath the surface of her, something that had been waiting a long time to be seen and was not quite ready to trust that it was safe to be. "Good night, James," she said. She left the room. I stood by the fire for a long time. It was a Sunday in May when everything nearly broke. She had been playing the piano in the east parlor for an hour. I had been in the hallway listening, the way I had taken to doing, standing with my back to the wall and my eyes closed, and the music filling the house the way music hadn't filled it in years. She played my mother's piece. She always ended with it. I came to the doorway. She didn't hear me. She was playing with her eyes closed, her head slightly bowed, her dark hair coming loose from its pins on one side, a strand falling across her cheek the way it always did when she was concentrating. The candlelight was gold, and the room was warm, and she was very beautiful, and I was standing there looking at her with absolutely no ability to pretend otherwise. She finished, opened her eyes, saw me. We looked at each other across the room. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. And something passed between us in that silence that was honest in a way that frightened me. Because I was a man who had decided he was better alone. Because this had started as a contract. Because she was 23 and had been handed to me to clear a debt, and whatever was happening in my chest was either the most real thing I had felt in 10 years or the most dangerous mistake I was capable of making. I said goodnight. I left the room. I went to my study and sat down and looked at the fire and made a decision. I would be fair. I would be kind. I would be everything I had promised to be. But I would not let this become something it could not be allowed to become. She deserved better than a man who had taken her as payment for a debt, allowing himself to feel things she had never agreed to. I held to that decision for exactly 11 days. The letter came in the 6th month. She brought it to me herself. She stood in the doorway of my study with it in her hand and an expression on her face that was neither her composed face nor her working face. It was something underneath both. My father has arranged a match, she said, for after the contract period. I set down my pen. He wrote to a man in Edinburgh, a widower, 51 years old, comfortable circumstances, 2 grown daughters. She paused. He's already expressed interest. My father wants an answer within the month. When does the contract period end? I asked. My voice came out very flat. 3 months, she said. The study was very quiet. Outside, the evening light was on the grounds, long and gold and slow. I looked at her standing in the doorway with the letter in her hand and the careful expression on her face, and I thought about 11 days of a decision I had made and everything I had refused to examine since. What do you want? I said. She blinked. Not what your father wants, I said. Not what the contract says. What do you want, Eleanor? She looked at the letter in her hand. A long moment passed. I'm not sure I know how to answer that, she said. I've been the answer to other people's problems for so long that when someone asks what I want, She stopped, started again. I know this house. I know this work. I know that I have been less invisible here than anywhere since my mother died. She paused. And I know that there are moments, at dinner or in the evenings or when you come and stand in the doorway while I play, when I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time. She stopped. Her voice had gone very quiet. And I don't know what to do with that because I don't know if it goes in one direction or two. The room was very still. I stood up from the desk. Eleanor. Don't, she said. Quickly. Her chin lifted. Don't say something kind and careful and fair. I know you are kind and careful and fair. I have known that since the first week. Just tell me the truth. Whatever it is, I can manage the truth. I crossed the room. I stopped in front of her, close. Closer than we had ever stood except the morning she was ill. I could see the flutter of her pulse at her throat. I could see her hands tightening very slightly on the letter. I could see the exact moment she decided not to look away. I tore the contract up, I said, 2 months ago. The night after you played and I came to the doorway and couldn't pretend anymore. The contract is gone. It's been gone since May. She stared at me. You've been here for 2 months with no contract, I said. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how. Because I spent 11 days deciding I had no right to feel what I was feeling and then gave up deciding because it made no difference. I paused. You asked me for the truth. The truth is that this house has been alive since you came into it, in a way it has not been in years. The truth is that I've been rearranging my days to have more hours in the same rooms as you and telling myself it was coincidence. The truth is that you are the most capable and honest and quietly remarkable person I have shared space with in my entire life, and I have been standing in doorways listening to you play and trying to convince myself that was a reasonable substitute for saying so. She hadn't moved. She was looking at me with those dark, steady eyes, and her lips were parted very slightly, and the letter was crumpled now where her hands had tightened on it. You tore it up, she said. Yes. 2 months ago. Yes. And you didn't tell me. No. Because you were being fair, she said. And there was something in her voice then. Not anger exactly. Something closer to disbelief. The disbelief of a woman who had been waiting for something and was only now understanding it had already been decided. Yes, I said. James, she said. Yes. Stop being fair, she said. And then she closed the distance between us herself. She kissed me with the same directness she did everything. No hesitation, no performance, just her hands coming up to my face and her mouth on mine and the letter falling somewhere on the floor between us. And I had my arms around her before I had decided to move, and she was warm and real and nothing like a contract, and the house was very quiet around us, and outside the evening light was gold across the grounds. When we pulled apart, she kept her hands on my face. Her eyes were bright. You are the most infuriating man, she said. I've been told, I said. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind I had been engineering reasons to hear for months. I held her tighter. Her father came back in July. He had heard from the Edinburgh man. He arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning with the particular energy of a man who has decided he is owed an explanation and has rehearsed several versions of how to demand it. I was in the study when Agnes showed him in. Eleanor was beside me at the desk. She had been going through the North accounts. When Hargrove walked in and saw us, side by side, her hand resting near mine on the desk, the comfortable closeness of two people who have stopped maintaining distance, something moved across his face. Surprise. Then something more complicated. Eleanor, he said. Father, she said. She did not stand. He looked at me, then back at her, then at the space between us with the expression of a man recalculating something. The Edinburgh arrangement, he started. No, Eleanor said. He blinked. I haven't. You were going to tell me the man has confirmed interest and is waiting on a reply, and that I should consider my position carefully. She looked at him steadily. The answer is no. There is no position to consider. I'm staying here. Hargrove opened his mouth. She's staying here, I said. Quietly. Not aggressively. Just as a fact with the full weight of my certainty behind it. He looked between us again. Something in him deflated, not cruelly. He was a man who had done a wrong thing for comprehensible reasons and had come out the other side into something he hadn't expected. His daughter, who had spent 3 years being quietly invisible in his house, sitting at another man's desk like she owned the morning. She did own it. You look well, Eleanor, he said finally. I am well, she said. Better than I've been. He sat down eventually. We had tea. He talked about the farm, about the county, about things that didn't matter. Eleanor was not cold to him. She was honest with him, which is a harder thing to be. When he left 2 hours later, she walked him to the door herself and said goodbye with the warmth of a daughter who had made her peace with something and was not going to reopen it. She came back inside and closed the door and leaned against it for a moment with her eyes closed. I waited. She opened her eyes. He'll come back, she said. He'll have another plan eventually. Let him, I said. It won't matter. She looked at me. You're very certain, she said. Yes, I said. She walked back toward the study and paused when she passed me and touched my arm once, briefly, and kept walking. I stood in the hall for a moment, then I followed her. There was one more storm before the winter settled. It came in September, 3 weeks before the morning she tried to leave. I had said something wrong at dinner. That was the simple truth of it. We had been arguing about the new estate wall I wanted to build along the northern boundary. She had a different approach. I had dismissed it in the way I sometimes dismiss things, quickly, with the assurance of a man who had been making decisions alone for 20 years and occasionally forgot that he no longer was. She went quiet. I noticed the quiet, but told myself it was just disagreement. She said goodnight early and went upstairs. In the morning, she was at breakfast, but different. Back straight, hands folded, the professional courtesy she had used on Hargrove extended now to me. It hit me harder than I expected, like walking into a room that had been warm and finding it cold. I tried to talk to her about the wall. You've already decided, she said, pleasantly, with perfect composure. Eleanor, it's your estate, James, she said. You know best. She poured her tea. I sat there. The words landed exactly as they were meant to. You know best. The thing people say when they have stopped expecting to be heard. I put down my cup. You're right, I said. She looked up. About the wall, I said. Your approach is better. I dismissed it because I was used to dismissing things and I wasn't thinking and I was wrong. She looked at me steadily. I have been making decisions alone for a long time, I said. I am trying to learn how not to. I will not always succeed, but I need you to tell me when I do it rather than going quiet, because when you go quiet, I lose the best part of my days." A long silence. Her composure slipped, just slightly, just enough. "You frightened me," she said quietly. "For a moment you sounded like my father." That landed like a fist. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She looked at the table for a moment, then she looked at me. "Don't do it again," she said. "No," I said. She picked up her tea. "Your wall idea is also structurally unsound," she said. "The northern soil won't hold that foundation through winter." "I know," I said. "I know that now." She almost smiled. The morning rebuilt itself around us slowly, the way mornings do after something has been said that needed saying. The morning she tried to leave was a Thursday in September. I came downstairs at 7 and the house had a different texture. Agnes was in the kitchen and the rooms were exactly as they always were, but something was absent. The particular quality of the air when Eleanor was in it was not there. I went to the hallway. She was at the bottom of the stairs with her coat on and one bag at her feet and the Edinburgh letter in her hand. She was looking at the front door with the expression of a woman who has decided something in the dark and is standing with the decision before she acts on it. She heard me. She turned. And her face, for just one moment before she arranged it, had the look of someone who had been lying awake making an argument to herself and had not quite won it. "I was going to leave a letter," she said. "Were you?" "I thought it would be easier." She looked at the bag. "The contract period ends next week. My father's man in Edinburgh is still waiting. And She stopped. "I have been lying awake for 3 weeks, telling myself that what is happening here is real and that it will last, and then I wake up in the morning and I think about what I am, what I was when I arrived. And I wonder if you will one day look at me and see a debt that was settled and feel—" She stopped again. Her voice had gone tight. "I wonder if I'm building something in a house that was never meant to hold me." The hallway was very quiet. "Eleanor's?" I said. I walked to the hall table. I opened the drawer. I took out the 4 pieces of the contract and held them for a moment. Then I set them on the table between us. She looked at them. "I tore that up in May," I said, "the night after I stood in the doorway and watched you play and couldn't manage the distance anymore. It has been gone for 4 months. You have not been here because of a debt or a piece of paper since the spring." She stared at the pieces. "4 months," she said. "Yes." "You didn't tell me. I told you in June," I said. "And now I'm telling you again because apparently once wasn't enough." I looked at her. "You asked me if you were building something in a house that was never meant to hold you. I answered you then, and I am answering you now. This house has been yours since March, not because of what you manage, or what you keep, or what you fixed, because of what you are. Because you arrived with a condition and a straight back and no expectation of kindness, and you got it anyway, and you stayed anyway, and you became the reason I come home." I stopped. "You are not a debt that was settled. You are the reason the debt doesn't matter." She hadn't moved. Her eyes were very bright. The letter from Edinburgh was still in her hand. She looked at it. Then she set it on the table beside the torn contract, carefully, like putting something down she didn't intend to pick up again. She looked at me. "I need you to say it plainly," she said. Her voice was unsteady for the first time. Not kindly, not carefully, plainly. "I love you," I said. "I have loved you since May, and I have been trying to be fair about it, and you told me in June to stop being fair, and I am taking that instruction now, permanently." Something broke open in her face, not dramatically. The way a window breaks open in spring, a release, a flood of different air. She crossed the hallway. She walked straight into me, and I held her, and she pressed her face against my shoulder, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Her coat was still on. Her bag was still at the foot of the stairs. The torn contract was on the hall table. Outside, the September morning was pale and new. Tell my father, she said finally, her voice quiet against my shoulder. Write to him today. I'll write this morning, I said. Tell him the Edinburgh man needs to find someone else. I will. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was level, and she looked exactly like herself, composed and direct and more beautiful than anything I had built in my life. You are still infuriating, she said. I know, I said. 4 months, she said. I was being fair. James. Yes. If you are ever that fair again, I will personally audit every account on this estate and find something wrong. There's nothing wrong with the accounts, I said. You did them. Then I'll put something wrong, she said. I laughed. She laughed. Agnes appeared in the kitchen doorway with the expression of a woman who had been listening from the beginning and was choosing magnificently not to say a single word. Breakfast is ready, she said. Thank you, Agnes, Eleanor said, still looking at me. We went to breakfast together. I wrote the letter to Hargrove after. I wrote it in the study with the door open and Eleanor at the other side of the desk going through accounts and the September light coming through the tall windows and the roses growing along the south wall in whatever direction they had always intended. I wrote it in 2 sentences. The arrangement your daughter came from is concluded. She is staying as my wife by her own choice and mine. I sealed it, sent it, and sat back in my chair and looked at the woman across the desk from me, the woman who had arrived in March with 1 bag and a condition and had taken my quiet, empty, well-managed life and made it full without ever once asking permission. I had been better alone for a very long time, and I was done with that now, completely and permanently done.